Hello, my name is John Burris, and thank you for joining me today for this short video. This video is called Are Your Hamstrings Strung Out? In this video, I'll be sharing you some new and exciting information about the hamstrings and show you how it may not be about your hamstrings. The hamstrings are the muscle in the back of the upper leg, and we share with you that we're often mistreated, misdiagnosed in our hamstring issues, and many people are plagued with hamstring issues and they're taught to go down the wrong direction. So I'll be sharing with you some myths about anatomy today. I'll be exploring the role of fascia in how hamstring issues occur, and we're looking at the body from a whole new way as I invite you to be part of the leading edge revolution of people looking for new and exciting ways to view their own body. So in today's video, the hamstrings will be explored from a holistic standpoint, and we'll be sharing with you that if you have a hamstring issue, it might not be coming from your hamstring, and you might not want to just be treating your hamstrings together. So I hear all the time from media sports analysts and from coaches and medical doctors, and they roll their eyes and say, oh, you know, that hamstring, it's pretty unpredictable. We don't really know much about it, and it's just a mystery. Well, it's not really a mystery if you know what you're doing. It's like asking an electrician and say, hey, you know, that electricity thing, it's kind of a mystery. And they get the electrician who's very well trained will say, well, not really if you know what you're doing. So unfortunately, most of us, we have a false pretense of our body. We don't really, we're living in a world where anatomy is hundreds of years old. It's where we're taught anatomy when at the same time they were using leeches to cure people. So anatomy needs to be updated, and today I'll be updating some of your anatomy and how hamstrings aren't usually about your hamstring. Some of this information comes from my nearly 40 years of working as a yoga therapist, a body worker, and working on many clients with hamstring issues. So it gathered me a lot of information. Also, I had hamstring issues for much of my life, especially my fitness and sporting career, and I always struggled on how to heal it. Well, I did heal it, but I had to do things that basically different. I had to go against the current medical model, and I had to do different things, and I'll be exploring with you today what those were. So for me, I can share with you, I did heal my hamstrings, but I had to basically break the traditional medical model to do so because it was taking me in the wrong direction and give me bad ideas. So I'll share with you how I healed my hamstrings, which was plagued me for decades, and you too can heal your hamstrings as well. So let's first get a working picture of what we're talking about for those who are not familiar with the musculoskeletal anatomy. The hamstrings are in the back of the legs. There's three actual hamstring muscles: the semimembranosus, semitenosus, and the biceps femoris, and they form this basically unique group of muscle tissue in the back of your legs. So here's our starting point of where we are when we talk about the hamstrings. Well, herein lies some of the problem. We live in a muscle-centric culture where muscle dominates. And yes, there's muscle tissue involved in hamstring issues, but in my experience, it's not necessarily a muscle issue, it's a fascia issue. And fascia is the surrounding connective tissue that surrounds the muscle tissue. And you have to treat the fascia tissue more importantly than the muscle tissue in order to heal the body. So it's really a fascia issue. And the way I describe it often is if you were to build a brick and mortar building, you would put a foundation of concrete and steel down, let it dry. Then you put mortar down, a brick on top, and then you put bricks side by side, and you put mortar between the bricks and another layer of mortar on top of the bricks. And after a while, you build the building. It's not really a brick building at all. It's a mortar building. It's the mortar holding the bricks together and the building together. So we're focusing too much on the muscle, which would be the bricks. In order to heal your hamstring, you need to focus on the fascia, which would be like the mortar in the body and the mortar in the building. So it's a different way to look at it, new perspective. This is why it's called new anatomy, and it's shedding some of the old anatomy beliefs. So when I had hamstring issues, I was taught by the sports therapist and the medical doctors, I need to go to the gym and work out more. I need to build strength around my hamstring tissue, strengthen my legs using bands and gym equipment. And that was a mistake. that never healed my body. So the current model of healing in the physical therapy world, in the sports training world, in the coaching world, I feel it's a mistake. You don't want to put more layers of muscle on top of an injury. We need to peel it away like peeling away an onion. So for me to heal my body, I had to peel away the layers of hard fascia that were literally strangling the muscle tissue. And so that was one of my secrets to success. I had to peel away the body and not build muscle on top. So the current model of healing is to basically put a layer of armor around your wounded body. You got a defect and a misfunction in the body where it's not firing correctly, and we're taught to put muscle layers on top. I believe that's a mistake, and so what I did, I had to turn directions and stop doing that and start unwinding my body and peeling away the hard tissues and not putting hard tissues on top of something that was not balanced. The second mistake in healing the hamstring is to treat it mechanistically. What do I mean by that? Well, in the 17th century, a Frenchman named René Descartes came up with the theory the body is just a series of parts, and the body was a machine and we just could replace the parts. That's mechanism. So the current model, the scientific medical model, is that the hamstring is just a part that can be healed directly. Well, that's not necessarily true. In the world I work in the holistic world, the body's all connected, and that injury might be coming from someplace else. In fact, most cases it's coming from someplace else. You cannot just treat the hamstring to correct the hamstring. You got to treat the whole system, and usually it's a structural defect that starts below the knee and whatnot, in the ankle, in the shin, the foot. For example, many people, professional athletes, high school athletes, college athletes, even 10-year-olds playing club soccer sprain their ankles, and then that ends up being a twisted leg, and then a rotated thigh, and then a pulled hamstring. The hamstring becomes the weakest part of the structure, and that's the first one to give out. You have to treat the entire structure all the way up the body. You cannot treat it mechanistically with just locating the injury site. For example, mechanism works sometimes. For example, if you step on a nail and you can't get it out of your foot, you might go to a surgeon and he cuts it out of your foot. He's not cutting at your knee, he's cutting exactly where the nail is. So mechanism works occasionally, but when it comes to an injury like the hamstring, occasionally you fall on it, you have a trauma there, but that's rare. Occasionally you might have a skiing accident or a surfing accident where you cut the tissues, and that's why it's causing a trauma in the hamstring. That does happen, that's called mechanism. But that's actually very rare. Most of the cases it's a structural issue starting below the knee, and it rotates, and the hamstring is the weakest part of the structure, and that's what gives out. So here's where we go through a deeper understanding the new anatomy. So let's, for example, you have a hamstring issue. You have an inflamed hamstring, you have a painful hamstring, you can't walk, whatever diagnosis they give you, tendinitis in your hamstring, mechanisms say, oh, you have a hamstring issue here. So the problem with that is most times it doesn't come from there. So we have to talk about the fascia network. Fascia is like saran wrap that wraps through the body, and it travels everywhere in the body. And it goes all the way through all the tissues, and it combines everything together and binds everything together. So I find that in most cases, if you have a hamstring issue, you really have something else going on down here. It could be an old ankle sprain, it could be plantar fasciitis, it could be an old broken foot, it could be shin splints. It could be something you forgot about. You could have stepped on a rusty nail when you were 10 or whatnot, a glass bottle and sliced your foot, causing scar tissue. So what happens is this, it causes your rotation here. So your lower leg, your ankle, that high ankle sprain causes scar tissue, and you start to rotate the lower leg. And then it starts to rotate outwards. Every time you cross a joint, in this case the knee joint, it tries to compensate by pulling the other direction. So now you're pulling the other direction, and your hamstring becomes the weakest part of the chain, and it basically snaps here, or you have tendinitis, or you have swelling or inflammation. So I see this with all athletes, for example. They're out for 4, 5, 6 weeks because they have a hamstring issue. Well, most likely they actually had an ankle issue that started years before. They ignored it. And so all those ankle sprains never went away, so it caused this spiral rotation in their leg. Rotates outward below the knee, spirals inward below the knee. Your hamstring is strained because it's the shortest link here. And now you have basically a hamstring issue. Well, guess what? Most sports people don't understand that. Those ankle sprains, those shin splints don't go away. They cause spirals and rotations in your leg. And when your lower leg has issues, it could have been 10 years old soccer, or it could have been a skiing accident when you're 8. That spiral up the leg shows you what happens, and eventually it ends up. So here's another picture of how this works. Basically, if you have a lower leg issue, and it might have started when you're 5, 8, 10, 15, and high school basketball, soccer, baseball, sliding on the diamond, twisting your ankle. It could have happened all kinds of reasons, but you forgot about it. But it caused distortions and trauma in your lower leg. So that trauma spirals up the leg to the fascia network. Once it crosses the knee joint, it compensates and tries to pull inward. So it's a compensation effect and starts to rotate inward. That's when your hamstring starts to tighten up because it's a compensation pattern from the rotation outward below the knee. So almost every hamstring I've worked on with clients has come from a rotation in the lower leg from an old injury, a broken foot, a sprained ankle, some kind of trauma, surgery to their foot, and it compensates as it moves up the body, and eventually it ends up in your hamstring, and your hamstring will tear or be swollen or tendonitis because there's too much strain on it from below. Another way to envision this with our model here. Basically, if you have an old injury to your foot, sprain, a break in your foot, surgery, whatnot, it causes your lower leg to twist outward. And then once it crosses the knee joint, it spirals and goes the opposite direction. So you get tightness in your hamstring here because you have a foot issue here. So it's all connected to the fascia network. It's all connected. And eventually it might lead into your hips and back, where you have a back problem here because you have a foot problem here and a tight hamstring here. So this is how athletes begin to fail and collapse, because one foot injury leads to a hamstring injury, leads to a hip injury, leads to a back injury, and now you're retired because it all starts with the fascia being too tight. And most people, especially athletes, don't pay any attention to their fascia. Doctors know almost nothing about it. So it starts this cascade of events that happen. So if your hamstring is too tight and pulling, and now you have a problem here, almost all the time is coming from somewhere below the knee where it's got some kind of old injury there that never got corrected. Now, if you would learn how to correct it, we'd be in a different story. But most of us aren't taught how to correct it, so we end up with problems farther up the chain here because we never correct below the knee. So the current model of trying to strengthen the hamstring is like patching a cracked wall from a tilted building. You're not really serving the body at all, because that's why most people with hamstring issues have them recurring all the time. It becomes chronic. Year after year, you hear the athlete of their chronic hamstring issue because they're taught to do the wrong things. They don't correct the system. They've basically been patching the cracks in the wall and not correcting the foundation. So in order to cure the hamstring issue, you've got to correct the entire structure. So that's the secret. That's the anatomy. Once again, that's called a new anatomy because most people are taught old anatomy that's hundreds of years old. The Cartesian model is 400 years old, and that's what medical doctors, sports therapists are still teaching, a 400-year-old model. So new anatomy says we need to look at the entire structure. We need to make fascia more important than muscle tissue, and we can't just focus on the hamstring muscle itself. We got to work on the entire structure. So for me, having decades of hamstring issues, I healed mine by getting regular massages, heating pads and herbs helped. I did a lot of fascia body work, a lot of yoga stretches. There were certain yoga poses where I thought my hamstring was going to tear if I went too far, because that's how painful it was, and it helped me learn that it had nothing to do with my hamstring. I had to correct my lower leg with fascia body work, more stretching, more functional movement like Feldenkrais, more massages, and more tissue awareness. And by stopping the medical model that I was taught to put muscle around the injury, I started to heal. So I find most people are doing the wrong things, and so they don't really heal, they become chronic. So the secret here is you got to step out of mechanism and you got to look at the entire structure. If you have a hamstring issue that's chronic, it might not be about your hamstring. It might be your whole structure's off, starting from the bottom of your foot, those old ankle sprains, those foot surgeries and whatnot, and it just starts spiraling your leg. You have to make fascia more important than muscle tissue. You have to look at the whole system as an integrated unit and not just pieces here and pieces there. Unfortunately, in our medical system, we outline our body as, oh, there's a calf muscle, and there's a hamstring muscle, and there's a quadricep. We need to forget that because it's the fascia that connects it all together. And you have to make fascia more important. That's why I highly recommended fascia bodywork and yoga therapy as part of your healing tool. So that's the hamstring story. I healed my hamstrings. You can too. But you got to step out of this model we're in of hardening, tightening, and just focusing on just the hamstring. For most people, it's not just about the hamstring. It's a structural issue starting from your foot. So thank you for joining me here today. Thank you for being part of the leading edge community of people looking for new and exciting ideas. Please subscribe to this channel for more leading edge videos to come. You can visit me at my website, johnburris.com. And I have a book, a great book called Return to Nature, The 5 Pillars of Healing. Pick it up, learn some new ideas, and be part of the leading edge generation. Thank you for watching.